You don't hear anything, Peter.
Welcome back. Today I will recap a 2023 American horror thriller film named Cobweb. Before we start, it is a request to please like and comment on the video as it will help us to grow our reach. Later that night, Peter's sister tells him that she heard them, and they are going to kill them. So he has to do something. Peter goes downstairs, where he watches his father and mother discussing something. Mark says they can't keep finding temporary solutions, and only then Carol notices Peter sitting there. He runs to his room and pretends to sleep, but Mark comes after him and says he knows he is awake, and that when he gets home tomorrow, he will help him out in the garden. The next day, we see them in the garden, and Peter sees that Mark has already dug up the garden, and perhaps he had disposed of that skeleton as well. He tells him that it's black rot, killing off the whole garden, and blight like this spreads fast. He says they are going to bury the pumpkins, and they are going to hope that the next crop is better. So he wants him to pick up the shovel and dig. Later, that evening, while they were having dinner, we see that Carol is a bit scared. Only then the doorbell rings, due to which she gets frustrated and goes to open the door. There are some trick-or-treaters who she scolds and drives away. She then returns to the table, and Mark asks her if did she do something different with the soup tonight. She eats it and finds it something different, and says it smells like cinnamon. Mark notices that Peter had not touched his meal, and he asks Peter if he has done something. Peter stays quiet, to which Mark gets angry and asks him what did he do. Peter says he heard his sister, and Carol asks him what did he say. Mark asks Carol to call 911, and as she gets up, Mark's stomach begins hurting, as it was the rat poison that smelled of cinnamon. Carol finds that the phone's cord had been cut off, and Mark spits blood on the table before he dies and falls down. Carol grabs a knife and begins chasing Peter, and she manages to grab his leg, but she also vomits blood. Peter thinks she also died, but suddenly she gets up, and Peter pushes her off, causing her to fall down the stairs and stabs herself. He then comes down to get the keys from his mother, but she grabs his leg and warns him don't let her out, but he ignores her warning and leaves there. He goes to that clock, and his sister asks him if he has the keys. She then asks him to move the clock, and when he tries to do so, the clock falls and breaks. He then finds a hatch there, and she asks him to open it. Now as he puts the key on the lock, she bangs it loudly, which scares him. The door then slowly opens, and soon Peter realizes that her sister is a monster, so he runs away from there. The entity giggles and Peter locks himself into his room, and we see that entity coming out of there. She then comes to Peter's room and tries to open the door, and asks him what was it like watching his parents dying. Only then does the doorbell rings and the entity leaves, and we see Brian with his cousins standing outside the house to teach Peter a lesson. The door opens on its own, and one of them says let's get this done. They enter the house and start looking for Peter, and he hides under his bed in fear. One of them then enters his room, and everyone else starts vandalizing his house. But during this, Brian slips and falls. The guy who was breaking the piano is leaving there, when he hears some sound and turns, only to find hair on the piano, that slides down. Now as he goes near the piano, that entity grabs his legs and makes him fall, and kills him. Here in Peter's room, that boy finds Peter under the bed, but before he could catch him, he hears his brother's voice, so he leaves. Meanwhile, Brian gets terrified seeing Carol's dead body there, and only then the door shuts on its own. He then hears some noise, and his brother comes out running, but the entity grabs his leg and starts tossing him. He asks Brian for help, but the entity drags him away, and only then Brian hears some noise from behind him, and we see that entity running on the ceiling around him. Suddenly spiders start falling on him. To avoid them he goes back, but there he encounters that entity, and gets terrified seeing it. His brother comes out hearing his scream, but the entity attacks him. Meanwhile, we see Miss Divine driving to Peter's house, and during this, Peter gets spooked to see that the entity has beheaded Brian's brother. She then comes out of the room and starts crawling toward him, and tells him that when he was born, they were so happy, but when she was born, they screamed. So Daddy made her a pit, then he made her a cage. While he was whining in this warm bed, she was suffering among cobwebs and rats, learning how to climb, how to bite, and how to make him do what she wants. She then throws a jack-o'-lantern in front of him, and Peter gets terrified seeing a head inside it. She then drags him away and locks him in the room, where she came out from. Later, Divine reaches Peter's house to check on him once again, and finds that the door is open. She enters the house and hears someone crying, and sees someone's shadow in the kitchen. Looking at the kitchen's condition, she tries to call 911, but only then does she hear some noise and sees that entity's hair, that goes inward. Now before she could understand anything, the entity scratches her leg, causing her to fall down, and when she tries to flee, she sees the dead body of Brian's brother in 2 pieces. She then gets spooked to see that entity crawling towards her and tries to escape, but finds that the door is locked. Only then does she hear Peter telling her to run, so she decides to save him and goes upstairs, and we see that entity following her. She goes to his room and finds his hand out of that hole, and he tells her that she has to run. She says she is not leaving him, and only then she notices that the entity is coming towards that room, so she closes the door and blocks it. She asks him what is that thing, to which he tells her that it's his sister. The entity then leaves there to go to Peter, and Divine tries to break the wall, and before she could reach him, Divine manages to get Peter out of there. They run downstairs and open the door, and as Divine runs out of the house, she realizes that Peter had been held back by the monster, and as Divine tries to go in, the door shuts. Now when Peter wakes up after some time, he finds himself locked in that underground chamber, where he finds a soft toy, and here he learns that his sister's name was Sarah. Sarah then comes there and begins crawling towards him, due to which he gets terrified, but he asks her why she is like this. Sarah says not every child can be as perfect as him. She was just born this way, and no one loves a monster. Only then Miss Divine comes there looking for him, and she says she doesn't know what she is, but if she hurt him, she will kill her. Sarah comes out of that chamber and makes her fall, and then she goes to her and was about to kill her, but only then Peter grabs hold of her long hair and climbs out of the hole in the basement. Seeing the opportunity, Divine begins attacking her with a rod, causing her to fall into the chamber, and before she could climb up again, Peter shuts the lid and locks it. Now as they were about to leave, Sarah in the child's voice requests him to free her. She says he is her brother and it's in their blood, so he killed mom and dad. Peter says he is not like her, to which she asks him does he really think this is going to keep her down here. Every night, when he lies in bed, he will wonder if he locked the door, or saw a shadow move. Every creak, every groan, and every tap on the wall, he will think of her. She then appears behind him, and as he turns, she says she will always be with him, and the movie ends here. To think of it, Sarah's life had been tragic. She was born different, and instead of providing her with the necessary care, her parents left her to rot in the dark. She was first kept in a pit and then transferred to a cage and ultimately to the dark space between the walls. Sarah watched Peter live a life of comfort while she was denied the bare necessities. She was a living, breathing human being who turned into a monster as a result of neglect. All these years, she has been learning to climb walls and make use of her strong limbs. She had been waiting for Peter to grow old, knowing that once he did, she would be able to manipulate him and free herself. Carol and Mark had all their hopes on Peter, while they tried to forget about Sarah by keeping her in the shadows. They could have approached Peter's curiosity in a better way, but instead, they scared him into obedience. Carol and Mark were terrible parents who could neither help their daughter nor protect their son. Peter is only 8, and it is impossible to determine whether he enjoyed causing havoc or simply gave in to the voice behind the wall. Maybe he had a lot of pent-up hatred against Brian, and even his parents, and a little instigation from Sarah made him commit the crimes. But with proper guidance and parenting, he has a future, though the looming fear of confronting his sister will perhaps leave him scarred for him. Please like and subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon never to miss new video updates. Thanks for watching.